What do most Fortune 500 executives have in common? They learned important lessons on the fields and courts of their high school and collegiate sports teams. This is true for both men and women. Ernst & Young found that a whopping 94% of women holding a C-suite position played sports. Their wins and losses shaped their habits and who they would become. Join me on my journey to sit with some of the brightest executives in the world as we discuss how sports shape their professional trajectory. In partnership with Chief Executive Magazine, the voice of America's CEO community. I'm your host, Don Yeager, and this is Corporate Competitor Podcast. With me for today's episode is Karl Mecklenburg. Karl rose from a college walk-on and 12th round draft choice to an NFL career with the Denver Broncos that included 3 Super Bowl and 6 Pro Bowl appearances. Widely considered the most versatile player in the NFL, Karl played all 7 defensive front positions, sometimes in a single game. As a speaker and author, Karl has dedicated himself to inspiring long-term positive change in teams and individuals, and we are bringing his wisdom to you in this interview and in the free bonus resource, which includes fill-in-the-blank notes and reflection questions. Download your copy at corporatecompetitorpodcast.com/114 to next level your learning.
It teams like a teeter-totter, a seesaw. On one side, you've got leaders. They think long-term. They think we instead of me. They put the team passion, the team mission first. On the other side, you got egos. They think short-term. Where's my money? How little can I do today and still keep this job? By adding or subtracting a leader or an ego, you tip that teeter-totter one way or the other. The middle group slides that way, and the middle group's the largest. They're the uncommitted. They slide that way, and you've got momentum towards success or you've got momentum towards failure.
Karl, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Don.
You know, there may be a few people out there who have a number 77 Karl Mecklenburg jersey, but I thought it was pretty fascinating that you didn't always have that number. In fact, there was a time in your football career when you actually had a 3-digit number.
I was a transfer in college. I was on the scout team. I was just a practice player, basically. If I wanted to eat with the team, I had to sweep up the weight room or sweep up the locker room. Usually your jersey number's on your laundry bag. The number on my laundry bag was number 114, right? There's 114 in football, but that was me. Tony Dungy was a graduate assistant, and he's in charge of the college walk-ons at the University of Minnesota at the time. Mike Shanahan was the offensive coordinator. Mike Martz worked in the film room.
These are all NFL head coaches.
Yeah, all NFL head coaches eventually. What an amazing place to land as a college walk-on.
Yeah.
I had a real drive. I wanted to be the best football player that ever played the game. That was my desire, my passion, my mission. Even at that point in my life, I was going to make the right decision every minute of every day, take another step closer and closer and closer to those desires, those passions, those missions. That's how I was raised. That's how I look at life to this day. And because I had that focus, I was able to rise up from number 114 and actually earn a starting position. There's a chance to make the right decision, a chance to make the wrong decision, especially in a team situation like football. And I would try to make the right decision every time.
Many of us get stuck in life falling in line with where other people kind of assign us. That's the number you're going to have. That's where you're going to be. That's how you're going to see yourself. That's how we're going to treat you. But even from the very beginning, you wanted to be the best, not just on the field you were playing on, but the best football player. It didn't matter what they assigned you. You were going to prove them different.
Yeah.
I did a book with Scott Drew, the basketball coach at Baylor. We had Scott on the podcast, and one of the themes along the line that you're sharing right there is that everybody talks about winning the day. He said you just need to win the decision. You need to be 1-0 in every decision. Gets more granular and allows you to rise from bag number 114.
Yeah. If you boiled down my football career into one word, it would be decisiveness. That's what allowed me to be a great football player. I wasn't the best athlete. I was the 310th pick of the draft. I was a college walk-on. I was a JV player as a junior in high school. I was just one of the guys What allowed me to rise to the level that I rose was that I was decisive. And that all comes from preparation. That all comes from making the right decision at the right time. This is something that I'm going to put everything I've got into and come out on top.
You've referenced your draft position. Those who do watch the draft today may know that the last pick of the seventh round, which is the last pick of the NFL draft today, is number 256. They actually even have a name and a celebration around the person chosen in that slot. He's Mr. Irrelevant. They have a parade for him in California. And
Right, I think he gets a car.
exactly. 256 is actually early compared to where you started your NFL career. What lessons did you learn in that process of actually hoping for and then not getting picked?
Yeah, that was a tough couple of days. I had talked to a number of different scouts. Atlanta had said they were going to pick me early in the draft, like sixth, seventh round, which was early for me. Unfortunately, they drafted a defensive lineman in the first round and the second round that year, so they weren't looking for any other defensive linemen. I just waited by the phone. Back then, there was no ESPN. There was no way to follow the draft. There were no cameras in the living room. So finally, I went to bed and the phone rang, and it wasn't even a coach. It was Jenny Ann, Coach Reeves' assistant. She said they were going to mail me an airline ticket, and if I want to come out and try out, good luck. So it was an interesting couple of nights. I knew ultimately that I was going to either get a free agent offer or I was going to get drafted. So I had an opportunity. Whether I was the first pick of that draft or I was the 310th pick of that draft, I had a uniform, I had cleats, I had the pads. Actually, when I got to the Broncos, they gave me the same number as a starter, Bryson Manners, number 93. It's not a good sign. I got a hole in one of my socks first week of training camp. I went into the equipment manager and asked him for another pair of socks. He said, "Karl, what's the matter with the other sock?" He gave me one sock. So I knew where I was in the pecking order, but I had an opportunity. Every time I had a chance to do the right thing on the field, I did the right thing on the field. And it got to the point where Coach Reeves was putting me out of the scout team because I was messing up so many of their drills. He's like, "Oh, no, just stand aside, put somebody else in because we got to run our drills." I was full blast all the time, and coaches recognized and appreciated that.
Powerful.
The average career in the NFL is 3 years.
Right.
I played 12 years in the NFL, Don. How do you play for 12 years? Make yourself indispensable. The leadership role, the mentoring role, the connections across the organization, the being there first and leaving last, doing whatever you can to help the team. I was a captain on the team. I played all 7 defensive front positions. I played special teams for my first 4 years. I took a leadership role in the Players Association. I took a leadership role in the pregame chapels. When people thought of the Denver Broncos, they thought of me. It was all do whatever you can to help the team. That goes beyond your talent. It goes beyond whatever they see you from when you initially get there. All of a sudden, this guy is who the Denver Broncos are.
Right.
If you want to rise up within the organization you're in, make yourself indispensable.
As John Maxwell said, be the first to help. You're always in there kind of throwing yourself at whatever the situation is. And ultimately, through the process of time and opportunity, you are making yourself indispensable.
Yeah. Make yourself indispensable. If you want to stay in an organization, if you want to stay in a business, that's how you do it.
We actually had one of your Denver Bronco teammates, Rafe Wilkinson, on episode 63 of this podcast, and he shared this great story about you.
One of the things that I really enjoyed most is standing in for Karl Mecklenburg, if you would. Just a great guy, very sound ethos from kind of the fabric in which he's come from. Because of playing and injuries, there's times where I had to run or sit in and kind of be his stand-in, for lack of a better description. Building that relationship with Mecklenburg was really good. And in fact, I think we were in San Diego about a week in, and just for his appreciation, he was kind enough just to give me a watch saying, "Hey, I just want to acknowledge all the effort, the things that you've done." So without question, the veterans and the coaching staff, just because they had been there the prior year, they had a rhythm down and they made it known, which was very helpful for a wide-eyed 21-year-old out of Sarasota, Florida. So very helpful.
Wow. It's impossible not to love Karl Mecklenburg. As a public speaker, he and I have been on stages together, and he is as humble and as gracious. That gift to your backup. That's an unusual tact, but really I could see that. What a great standard that sets for everybody else, right? Respect the people who are there and are maybe giving you that, as you said, that chance to recover a little bit.
It was meaningful, and it stuck with me for, obviously, at 55, it's still front of mind.
Wow. I really felt that I needed to. I was playing at the time all 7 defensive front positions, moving around. And this kid, he didn't have any idea what he was into being my backup, particularly standing in for me on defensive drills on days I couldn't practice. He had to learn, and so much was expected of him. For him to step in and do that for me, I thought was a fabulous thing. Now, leadership in my mind is about cornerstones. This is who we are. This is what we stand for. It's about day-to-day commitment. If you sign on to this job, this is what it's all about. And finally, connection. Having an appreciation and the connection to the people around you is so vital for leadership. When I got to the Denver Broncos, I was a 240-pound nose guard. They don't exist in the NFL. It doesn't happen. But the coaching staff saw things in me that allowed me to make the team and then make the switch to linebacker that no other coach had seen before. And the only way they could have had that is have that connection, go out of their way and say, you know what, this guy is capable of so much more than what we're asking him to do right now. There's people in your organization who have signed on for a specific job because that job was available, but they would help your team so much more if they were in a different position. Do you know that person? Can you mold that person and put that person in the right place to make a huge difference in your business?
Yeah.
They've already made the commitment to your organization. Now you make that commitment to them, put them in the right place. Use the strengths of the individuals to help the team. Use the strengths of the team to cover for the weaknesses of the individual. That's what great coaching is about. That's what great leadership is about.
I love it. So you and I both discuss often about what it means to be a great teammate. Tell me about the best teammate you ever had.
Wow, I've had a million great teammates, but the guy that stands out to me is Gary Kubiak.
Mm.
You got to understand, Gary Kubiak was a stud.
Oh, yeah.
8-time All-State Texas athlete as a high school player. He was All-State twice in basketball, twice in track, twice in baseball, twice in football. He set every record you can set at Texas A&M in football. Gary Kubiak was the 8th round pick when I was a 12th round pick. Back then, they didn't have limited numbers of workouts. So as soon as you got drafted, you went out to your team city and you started working out with the other rookies. He came to summer workouts, and Gary was running first team very well. At the start of training camp that year, he also was doing repetitions with the first team, even with the big guys in there. And then they traded for John Elway. He wasn't going to play. He came with every intention of being the starting quarterback for the Denver Broncos, and that wasn't going to happen once they traded for John Elway, and he knew it. And instead of forcing a trade or doing the type of things that you see players do now and again, he figured out a way to lead from the sidelines. He ran our scout team every week, and not only would he do the plays as they were drawn on the card that the coaches put in front of him before each play in practice, but he would study the other team's quarterback, figure out what their tendencies were, how they threw the ball, whether it was fast or slow, or he would do whatever he possibly could to get us ready for the game. He was amazing. We won football games because Gary gave us a good look in practice every single week. There was no question about that.
Yeah.
Before every game, he'd come up to me and say, "Mac, hold up the class." And I thought about what that meant. Obviously, we were drafted the same year. That had something to do with it. But it occurred to me is that Gary was saying, "Karl, I've done everything I possibly can to get us ready for this football game. Now I got to stand here with a clipboard and a hat on the sidelines. Hold up the class. Get out there and make some plays."
Wow. What a great story. A good friend of ours, Jeff Henderson, who works with us at the Maxwell Group, just wrote a book about what to do next. It's about the idea of transition. Many athletes struggle with transition after they hang up their cleats. You pointed out how much longer you played than the average player in the league. But when did you start to begin preparing yourself for next?
I didn't. I was of the opinion, and still am of the opinion, that if you're going to be the best you can possibly be in the situation you're in, you're all in. Probably the thing I miss most from football is the adrenaline, that game day excitement. And as you know, when you get up in front of a group trying to remember what you meant to say, that adrenaline comes right back. So that was really the thing that attracted me to speaking. And beyond that, the pattern is so much like sports. You game plan depending on the person, the group you're speaking for. You perform at a high level for a short period of time. You evaluate what went on and you repeat what went well. You fix what went wrong and get ready for the next one. I mean, it's football, but I've never been hurt yet speaking. So
You haven't torn an Achilles making your way up the step. That's good.
yeah, yeah. I did not have the next. That was not part of me. And actually, my schooling, I was a biology major at the University of Minnesota and took the MCAT test, was going to go to medical school, got drafted by the Broncos and became a patient instead.
It's funny to talk about the adrenaline. I remember a couple of years ago, my son was looking at my Fitbit numbers and he noticed that there were these periods where like my heart rate got up really high. And he was like, Dad, were you jogging or what were you doing? And they were actually windows when I was speaking. To your point, it's a really special opportunity when we get those chances to go do that.
For sure.
But you had a funny introduction to the world of speaking.
Yeah. I got an opportunity to speak. It was my rookie year. The Broncos had made the playoffs, and it was the first time they made the playoffs in 5 years, which is actually where we're at right now. We're playing the Seattle Seahawks. People, I thought, were going to be unbelievably excited, but also a little apprehensive. See, I grew up in Minnesota. When the Vikings make the playoffs, people panic. They get this thing in their throat and this thing in their stomach, and they think, oh God, here we go again, and everything's going to fall apart. But no, people were so excited, painting their houses orange. Everybody had a flag sticking out of their window of their car. I mean, there was a whole generation of children named John Elway Wilson or John Elway Smith. And the Museum of Natural History decided to take advantage of this excitement about the Broncos and hold a pep rally. And they called the Broncos, and the Broncos assigned me and our old running back at the time, a guy named Sammy Winder, to go down and speak at this thing. I'd never done anything like that before in my life. I thought about it, and I'd done a lot of new things that year. Got my first real job that year, if you count football as a job. Got married that year. Got my first new car that year, a Trans Am with T-tops.
There you go.
I thought I was Smokey and the Bandit. So I said, all right, I'll do this thing. Now, how many of you have been to Museum of Natural History? Probably everybody has, or at least you've seen that movie, Night at the Museum. You know what these things are like. The one in Denver is a lot like the one in the movie, except there's all these one-way streets down there, and they were going the wrong way that day, so I got there late. As I walked in, the lady in charge of the pep rally and Sammy had already headed down to where this thing was to be held, and I hurried up and caught up with Sammy and asked him what was going to happen. And Sammy explained it to me like this: Karl, first I'll get up, I'll talk about the offense. Then it's your turn. You get up, you talk about the defense. And then this lady here is going to hand us a Seahawk, and we're supposed to tear it up. I could do that. It wasn't a very big crowd. It was maybe 40, 50 people, but they had their Bronco hats and their Bronco jerseys and the foam fingers and the pom-pom. I mean, if you're going to give a first speech, it was a great group to give it to. And Sammy got up and did a great job. Talked about how Elway was going to throw the ball and how he was going to run it and how many points the Broncos were going to score. And the fans are getting excited. And I'm scared. I mean, I'm sitting back there sweating, thinking about having to get up in front of the group. But I got up anyway. And I started talking about how Louis Wright and Steve Foley were going to intercept the ball, and Randy Gradishar and Tom Jackson tackled their running backs, and myself and Roland Jones sacked the quarterback. And the fans are getting excited. I'm thinking, hey, I like this. Public speaking is pretty cool. And then it's time for the Seahawk. And the lady takes this bird, it's a taxidermied bird, hands it to Sammy, and Sammy holds it up over his head and says, Karl, you're the defensive player, you tear it up, and he gives me this thing. Now, if you've seen the movie or you've been to the museum, you've seen the glass enclosure, and inside of there is a featured animal, and the whole environment that animal lives in, very lifelike, right down to the grass and the ants and the grasshoppers. This bird wasn't anything like that. This bird's wings were pinned to its side. It had feathers sticking out. It looked like it had come out of a shoebox. I held it up to this side of the crowd and said, this is what we're going to do to the Seahawks. I told you I'm from Minnesota. In Minnesota, if someone says tear it up, tear it up.
Right.
Sammy's from Mississippi. I found out later in Mississippi, tear it up can mean like tear up the town, tear up the dance floor, wrestle around, be rough with something. I ripped this bird in half. I threw the half with no head attached to the ground. I tore the head off the other half. I threw it out in the crowd. The crowd's going crazy. I'm thinking, I love public speaking. This is for me. And then I saw the lady in charge of the thing, and she had her head in her hands. Couldn't believe what I just done. The Seahawk was actually an osprey, part of an ongoing study of the osprey species where they collected one every year. The crunchy osprey that was spread on the ground in front of me had been collected in 1910. As I leave the scene of the crime, they're announcing, whoever caught the head of the Seahawk, please bring it back. You'll get free passes to the IMAX theater. I got a phone call from my mom that night. She read about it in USA Today. It was a tough deal. Rookies, what are you going to do?
It had to be sewed back together.
It did. Actually, the Broncos hired an expert from New York to come back and sew this thing together.
You were the most expensive rookie they ever sent out.
Right. I had to have the courage to try something new. And then I had to have the courage to look at it and be honest and forgiving with myself and say, you know what? I could have done this differently and I could have done that differently. I could have made sure I understood what my role was in this thing. There was a lot of things I could have done differently and that wouldn't happen. Everybody has failed at trying new things. And that's why it's so hard to try new things. But I tried it again. And I've been a professional speaker for 17 years now, longer than I was a professional football player. I'm looking forward to more opportunities to speak. It's been tough through the pandemic, just not having the in-person meetings. And finally, they're picking back up again. I forgot how much I love being a part of a meeting, part of an organization, part of a team for a minute there, and then hopefully making a difference for the individuals and the team.
I love it. Karl, you had the honor and the chance to play for one of my favorite coaches in the NFL, Dan Reeves. Can you share a story of a lesson you learned from Coach that you still think of all these years later?
The thing that impressed me more than anything was just his drive to win, that innate piece of him that would not accept losing.
It's pretty powerful.
He would connect with players in a way that other head coaches often don't, particularly on the offensive side, because he was an offensive coach and he had enough sense that he was going to delegate authority to Joe Collier and the defensive staff. He looked at football as not an individual thing, not as an offensive thing, not as a defensive thing, but as a team thing. A lot of the offense and a lot of the frustration people in Denver had with Dan is that he ran the ball so much. But the other team isn't scoring when the clock's getting used up by you running the ball. He helped our defense and he helped our offense by setting up the long passes. And John was able to throw those long passes as well as anybody was. You run the ball, you control the ball, and then you pick your spots. That's what Dan was real good at. Looking at it as an entire team instead of, yeah, I'm in charge of the offense, so I'll do whatever I can to make the offensive stats go up. That's not the way he looked at football.
Yeah. He understood what he had, but he also understood what it took to win. You have a John Elway who's got an incredible arm. Let's just throw that ball. It wouldn't serve the team well if they were to just lean on that one skill set. You had to make sure that people weren't sure when that skill was coming into play.
Yeah, no, he was ahead of his time and also drew from the past. I mean, if Tom Landry didn't do it, we didn't do it. And what Tom Landry did worked. And Dan was a leader of men in that he could see the big picture. People get moved up into leadership positions, and instead of just focusing on their little niche and their little job, now all of a sudden you're responsible for everything. And you have to see the world that way. And Dan did a very good job of seeing the world that way.
You've often said that the craziest memory you have from the NFL was when the Broncos played the Cleveland Browns in the AFC Championship in 1986.
Yeah. Cleveland at the time was really depressed.
Yeah.
Oh, they had a great team too. That team could have played in the Super Bowl, just not instead of us, right? They were an unbelievable team. It was the AFC Championship game. Winner of that game goes on and plays in the Super Bowl. We got to Cleveland Friday night. We're in a downtown hotel. It's kind of a tower deal with an alley behind it. And the Cleveland fans drove around our hotel all night long, honking their horns and barking. Both nights, Friday night and Saturday night, trying to keep us awake. It was about 3 miles from our hotel to the stadium. Saturday, we drive down to the stadium and we saw nobody. It was like the neutron bomb had gone off. There was one individual I saw, he was a drunk. He had like sunglasses on with one glass in, the other glass out, a wool skirt, passed out against the wall.
Didn't you realize that was the starting quarterback?
Right. But on Sunday, we drove that same 2 miles, and the entire 2 miles was lined with Browns fans barking at us, throwing milk-bone biscuits at us, cussing us out. I mean, it was us against the world in that situation. And to go in under those circumstances and win a football game was just unbelievable. Probably the highlight of my career.
Boy.
The drive was amazing.
Yes.
It really was. But that didn't win the game. We lost the toss. Defense, we had to go out. We had to stop them again. We did, 3 and out. The offense got the ball close enough for a field goal, and Rich Carlos kicked the thing right over the top of the upright. Anybody from Ohio swears that was no good. But the ref did this, and there was no replay back in those days. It was good. Off we go to the Super Bowl. What a wonderful memory and a great time for us.
Wow. Those are moments where, as you said, us against the world, moments like that where momentum begins to shift. The drive took the air out of the stadium. Cleveland folks thought that they were headed to the big game. Is there some way to help capture a moment when something really good happens and extend its life into what we might call momentum?
Great question. I talked already about decisiveness. There's a step beyond decisiveness. What you call it in sports is the zone. I'm in the zone. I'm making the right decisions before I should be able to make the right decisions. And I'm in the right place at the right time and everything's going my way. People look at that team zone thing as a momentum thing, that everything's going right, where everything we hope might happen is happening. You can manufacture that feeling and that approach through preparation, going into every situation with an understanding of what possibly happen and being prepared enough to take advantage of those opportunities and allowing yourself to take advantage of those opportunities. When you're decisive, when things start going right because you're decisive, it feels like momentum, and you get to that point where you're anticipating things that you shouldn't be able to anticipate. It's that trust, it's that reliance upon each other, the coming together as a team, the leadership allowing the whole organization step up and take leadership roles. It teams like a teeter-totter, a seesaw. On one side, you've got leaders. They think long-term. They think we instead of me. They put the team passion, the team mission first. On the other side, you got egos. They think short-term. Where's my money? How little can I do today and still keep this job? By adding or subtracting a leader or an ego, you tip that teeter-totter one way or the other. The middle group slides that way, and the middle group's the largest. They're the uncommitted. They slide that way, and you've got momentum towards success or you've got momentum towards failure. That's how it happens in the NFL. That's how it happens in my family. That's how it happens in businesses. That's how you can make a huge difference, by getting people in that middle group involved in leadership, give them opportunities to state what they think is important and follow that up with getting everybody moving in that direction. It's a looking at yourself as a team instead of looking at yourself as some stratified organization.
Karl, I have to tell you, that seesaw analogy, the visual of that, one side just has to be a little heavier than the other. And if you can, the middle piece of the organization slides toward that side and momentum begins to build. Powerful analogy.
Well, thanks, Don. I remember watching Pat Bowlen, the Denver Broncos owner, meet and greet and talk with the janitors at the Broncos facility, the equipment managers, the weight coaches, everybody from the top to the bottom. He had their name, he had who they were, what they did, how they helped the organization. He was in the training room, in the weight room, in the locker room, in the equipment room, on practice field. He knew my wife's name, my kid's name. He was part of the team. He didn't look at himself as anything but part of the team. And that brought us all together as a team. And then when difficult things happened, we relied on each other and we trusted on each other and went into us against the world situations when we're able to be successful.
I had no idea that he spent that kind of time and effort actually having that much knowledge about everybody within the organization. What a gift that is to see in leadership.
Yeah, no, I mean, he was amazing that way.
Man, that's powerful. Many people, they love to talk about their teams. My team is doing this. You understand teams. If you were advising some young leader out there on how to take a group of individuals and mold them into that thing we call team, what would you advise them to start thinking of doing?
For me, the biggest necessity in leadership and team interaction is what I call a sports mentality, honesty and forgiveness and self-evaluation and with others. In the NFL, they film everything. They film every game from 2 different angles. Now it's 3 different angles. They film every practice. Under Mike Shanahan, they even film meetings. So theoretically, you could sit in a meeting watching film of yourself practice. So everything's filmed and everything's evaluated, both on technique and on assignment. You sit in the meeting room with the other linebackers, and the coach is hollering at you when you did the wrong thing, and he's praising you when you did the right thing right in front of your peers. You have to be able to understand that he has your best interest in mind, that he needs you to be an example, a positive example for the other players in the room, and a negative example for the other players in the room. Having that honesty and forgiveness built into your system and being displayed by you as a leader is vital for people to feel that team thing. All of a sudden, they've seen you at your best and they've seen you at your worst. And they've seen you succeed and they've seen you fail. They've been a part of those things. They know that everything you do is pointing towards that ultimate team goal, that ultimate team mission. If you have that all in your heads at the same time, then you got great chance to succeed.
Yeah.
It's the ability to work alongside of people, all pushing towards the same result and advising each other, mentoring each other, moving forward as a team rather than shooting off in your own direction every time you get an opportunity that looks a little bit better. Under Pat Bowlen, our desire, our passion, our mission, our cornerstones as a team was to win championships and to serve Broncos country. When you sign on with a team, whether you were that janitor, you were that equipment manager, whatever you were, that's where we were going as a team. And he was clear and he was consistent with it. And he was honest and he was forgiving in his evaluations there. But ultimately, if you didn't fit within that framework, you didn't work for the Broncos.
That's it.
We had 13 rookies make it my rookie year.
Wow.
Edgar Kaiser was trying to sell the team. He wanted to get the salary numbers down. How do you do that? You sign a bunch of rookies. We still had those guys who had gone to the Super Bowl, and the Orange Crush defense was there. And a lot of the offensive line, offensive players were there too still. And instead of resenting us, they realized, you know what, we've got to get these guys going in the right direction if we're going to win as a football team. And they taught us not only how to be football players, but they taught us how to be men. That acceptance of a role on a team, mentoring and bringing the young people along within the culture of that organization is invaluable. If you want to have honesty and forgiveness, it starts at the top with the veterans. Those people set the culture, and the culture goes down through the young people as long as there's honesty and forgiveness in your relationships.
I love it. Karl, how can our listeners best reach out and stay in touch?
KarlMecklenburg.com. You can misspell it numerous ways and still find it probably.
I hope you own all of the misspellings. That's the key right there.
That's probably the best way. I'm on all the social media. Having a unusual name like Karl Mecklenburg makes it so I've got all the at Karl Mecklenburg's everywhere.
You didn't have to go fight for those spots.
I did not have to buy them from anybody. It worked out really well. I also have a podcast I'm just starting myself, which is going to be fun. It's going to be called A Sports Mentality, talking to people about how that has made a difference in their lives, not only as far as athletes, but in the rest of their lives.
Karl, I thank you so much today for giving us wisdom, for giving us nuggets, not just Denver nuggets, but nuggets, and for being a corporate competitor with us.
Thanks, Don. I appreciate the opportunity.
Having listened to Karl Mecklenburg, like our producer, Savannah, I would be ready to go put on a Broncos jersey. That was powerful. His stories around the idea of becoming indispensable, and how that for each of us, if we can go find that place in our organization where we can add value to everyone else in the group, we become indispensable. It doesn't matter where they drafted us. It doesn't matter what title they've given us. We can become indispensable. The story about the quarterback that was drafted with them, Gary Kubiak, and how everything looked so good for him until they brought in a superstar like John Elway. And Gary had to learn to lead from the sidelines. But even there, he would come over and grab Karl, his draft class teammate, and remind him to hold up the class, that while Gary would have to stay on the sidelines, Karl could make a difference in the game. and that he wanted to encourage his teammate to do exactly that. The third story that just jumped out was the idea of Pat Boland, the owner of the team, knowing everyone, right down to the folks in maintenance and in training, knowing not just the employee's name, but knowing the names of their spouse or their children, having the opportunity to lead because he had connection. And then finally, his lesson about seesaw leadership and the idea that if we want to try to build a great team, we need to see it like a seesaw. And that on one end will be our leaders, on the other end is sometimes the ego of individual contributors, but in the middle sits most of the organization. And if we can just add one person to either side, the middle will slide one way or in the other direction. So you want to add leaders, add talent, add those who are able to pull that strong middle toward a positive outcome. What a great lesson it was today. But before we end the show, I want to give a shout out to one of our listeners, Tessa Campen. Tessa is a trainer, speaker, and coach, and she just left the nicest review on Apple Podcasts. She said, "This podcast provides mentors that help me understand the value of team. Thank you so much for pouring into us. I look forward to learning and growing through your episodes." Wow. Tessa, thank you so much for making my day. And if this interview with Karl has given you a Denver nugget that will make you better, will you join Tessa and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? Doing so allows us to continue to add value to people who multiply that value to others. Until next week, I appreciate you. If you could share one habit, one thing you've done consistently that allowed you to separate yourself from your competitors, what would it be? In my 30-year career, 2,500 of the greatest athletes, coaches, and leaders answered that question for me.
This is Don Yeager, who did that article I was telling you about.
Don, Dave Sims with Coach K. How you doing?
Hey, Don. How you doing, my man? Great, sir.
What they gave to me is what I'm giving to you in my online course, Journey to Greatness. Through engaging storytelling and on-demand videos, you will learn the 16 habits that will jumpstart your personal growth. I will instruct you on how to apply these winning characteristics to your life through custom workbook exercises. We are slashing the price for our podcast listeners. Lifetime access to Journey to Greatness is normally $399, but for our podcast listeners, it will be $49 with the code podcast at checkout. Click the banner on corporatecompetitorpodcast.com to enroll. Thanks for listening to the show. I would be so grateful if you left us a rating and a review. We will be rolling out a new episode every Wednesday. To be the first to listen, subscribe to the podcast on our website, corporatecompetitorpodcast.com. Plus, as a thank you gift, you will receive a free chapter from one of my best-selling books on the habits of high-performing teams. Stay in touch by connecting with me on social media at Don Yeager, Yaeger, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Until next week, I appreciate you.